close the budget shortfall for Caledonia. 2 minutes.
I think all of us would hate to see us have to raise taxes. However, Caledonia certainly, as we know, is in a budget shortfall, and it's not going to be an easy thing to solve with a quick fix. I would hate to see us have to exceed the state cap. It may be necessary at some time. I certainly wouldn't rule it out. But I think we all would hate to see that. And I know that I wouldn't want to see it for my property taxes either.
Okay, thank you. Wendy, over to you. 1 minute.
Well, to exceed the levy limit means that you also lose state revenues. So you'd have to exceed it by an awful lot to make up for the revenues that you were going to lose. So I think you just plain have to try to stay within that cap and find a way to make it work.
Okay, thank you. Sean?
I've done a lot of investigation to find out exactly where we are by going out and visiting the different, I went and talked to the highway department, I went and talked to the fire chief, and one of the things I'm very concerned about is that we keep trying to avoid the hard decisions of getting some things done, putting them off until the next day and the next board, because you don't want to have to be the ones that have to tell you something you don't want to hear. I am conservative as well. I don't want my taxes to go up either. I think it is a last resort, but there are some things that we've been putting off for so long that we're going to end up paying 2 and 3 times more for it just because we didn't want to take care of it when it was a small problem. For example, the fire department has a new roof. They just put it on. They waited a while to put the new roof on because they didn't want to pay the money. The damage to the building, including exterior and interior, is now something that's going to have to be taken care of at an additional cost. How smart was that?
Okay, thank you, Sean. Jerry, 1 minute.
Yeah, I'm a very strong conservative. Unless there are extenuating circumstances, I would oppose any tax increase. One of the things that we should encourage is much more industrial and commercial development in town, expand our tax base. There's another deal I'd like to maybe consider. Once we do stabilize our budget, and I think that's a very high priority, I'd like to start a new policy, and that would be where, let's say, the certain budget items in the big 3 departments, the budget for a certain year would not have to be spent by any one department, maybe in a certain budget categories, and then the budget for the next year, even if the budget is not spent in that preceding year, would be equal to what it is in that previous year. And then I would look at creating maybe a bonus for that department to provide an incentive to having a savings in that budget category.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're ready for the next question now. We started with you, Wendy. All right, here's the question. What are your feelings about KRM? And I'm going to add to that. The KRM is going to have to be funded by the taxpayer with a new taxing body, a regional taxing transit authority. So I'd like you to include that part in your address and how you feel about it. Okay? All right, 2 minutes. Thanks.
Well, I started out by saying that I think the best thing for Caledonia is to become more of a community, not just a bedroom community, but an actual community with a downtown. I think small businesses are the engine of economic growth, and I think it's more possible in this area where there's already sewer and water and services. It's going to be hard, but not as expensive. So the way you feel about KRM is that could help that happen. Okay? So I have said that I am for KRM. I'm not out there fighting just for KRM. I think it's part of a whole package of trying to do something with this area, basically in this area. It's not true that it has to be, there would be a separate organization that would take care of the KRM. The last state legislature ordinance that was passed, or I don't know if it was an ordinance or what it was, but the last thing that was passed by the state legislature was allowing the groups to, meaning Racine, Caledonia, the RTA, to use whatever taxing, or not taxing even, but use any way they wanted to raise the money. They were not told that they had to add a tax. And one of the ideas in the past has been to have a surcharge on rental cars. And I think that's not a bad solution, because when we go other places, we pay that in other areas. So I think it's wrong to think that if KRM would come in, which I understand it isn't going to work because it's pretty controversial, that it would not necessarily add to your personal taxes. It can be done other ways.
Okay, thank you. Over to you, Sean. 1 minute.
I'm not in favor of KRM. And I like mass transit. When I was in Chicago, I took mass transit. I took the the freeway flyer when it was available to me when I was working downtown Milwaukee. That's not the issue. The cost is the issue and the return on investment. When I purchase things for my office, the first thing I think of is how long is it going to take for it to pay for itself. This thing will never pay for itself. It's going to be a blood drain for a very long time. There are 80%, I looked it up, mass transit, 80% lose money. So that doesn't count the ones breaking even, and I don't think there's 1 or 2 that are making money. If any of those people attended the meeting on Tuesday at South Shore, it was great. It was a really good presentation. I am not in favor of KRM at this time.
Thank you. Jerry, over to you.
Yeah, I think KRM would be a massive government boondoggle. It would use up far more wealth than what it would ever create. It's 1940s technology. The train would average a speed of 35 miles per hour between Milwaukee and Chicago. It would take like 2 hours and 40 minutes to travel one way from Milwaukee to Chicago. That means if you're a commuter working in Chicago, you'd have to travel on the train for about 5.5 hours and then work for 9 hours. I mean, that's crazy. It doesn't make any sense. Startup cost for KRM is like $200 million. You take a small percentage of that and improve 4 Mile Road to between 31 and 94. You get a much greater return on your investment. Also 7 Mile Road between 38 and 994. There's little or no development that occurs around train stations. It's ridiculous to think that we're going to get any type of return on this investment. Just look at the train station out in Sturtevant. There's no development around that station.
Okay, thank you. Finishing up with you, Tom.
I'm not sure a minute's enough for this subject, but I'll try. My wife and I grew up in a community that had subways and rail transit. And we were a little surprised that it wasn't here when we moved here. So in principle, I like the idea of KRM, but there's not enough population in this area to support it and fund it. So with that said, I don't see how it's feasible in this area. Now you asked us that, talk about the taxing part of it, or the funding part, the taxing body. I certainly am one that's opposed to RTA having taxing authority without elected representation. Those people should be accountable to the citizens of this community.
Okay, thank you.